So, delighted to introduce our next speakers. I've known Laurel and Sugden for several years now. In fact, she spoke at the conference, I think 4 years ago, maybe? Yeah. She's a PhD candidate at UBC under her advisor, Wade Davis, who will be speaking this evening, by the way. Don't miss that, please. She's originally from Montana and now divides her time between Montana and what do they call that area? The Sacred Valley of Peru? Yeah. With her husband, Josip Orlovac del Rio, who's a Huachuma, otherwise known as San Pedro, cactus master from coastal Peru with over 30 years experience and over 5,000 cacti or cacti in his gardens. So would you folks please come up and give them a big warm hand?
Thanks so much, Stephen. Hi. So often, when we talk about the plants, we really only talk about ourselves and about how the plants are useful to us. Today, Josip and I want to talk about the plant, the beautiful plant, San Pedro, Huachuma, Tsunak, El Remedio, Cure, Santo Cardón, Gigantón, Echinopsis pachanoi, Echinopsis peruviana, Lapitoch, Hawacoyay, Espino, La Planta. We often say that San Pedro has a 4,000-year history, but really it has a 4,000-year history with humans as one of the earliest plants to be central to a developed civilization. The plants themselves have been around in their current form, in their current habitat, for about 10 million years. Some people say that San Pedro is a grandfather. The healers of North Peru will tell you the plants are mother, father, child, elder, and every other relation. Some people say that San Pedro is sustainable. Maybe they just don't know. But they're often the ones who are making money from the myth of an inexhaustible wild source of San Pedro. It's an easy story to tell as long as you don't actually go take a look at what's going on. I told some of these stories myself when I last spoke at this conference in 2018. They're stories that come from books, from the internet, from discourse in retreat centers in idyllic valleys far from the native habitat of the plant. And most of all, these stories come from our human desire to keep getting what we want. But today, I want to tell you the difficult story, which is the truth of San Pedro's state in the wild at this moment in Peru. And this story has been forming over the last 4 years of my PhD fieldwork on the ground in San Pedro's habitats. And it's also been forming through the experience of Josip, my beloved, who from his lifetime of love for San Pedro knows the plant better than anyone I've ever met. The story of wild San Pedro is a simple, universal story, that there's always enough of everything until there's not. Over the last 4 years, we've traveled through most of San Pedro's endemic habitats in Peru doing windshield surveys, which involves assessing the number and the distribution of plants from a moving vehicle. This is a rough but a really effective preliminary method of surveying a wide range of habitats with a limited amount of time and resources. And in habitats that are inaccessible by road, or where we needed to get a better look, we supplemented that with walking surveys. And though the windshield and walking surveys were academic, it's also been an opportunity for incredibly deep sweet connection with what Josip calls the big spirit of San Pedro. Thousands and thousands of plants which are connected to each other, to the sky, to the earth, to the past, to the future, and to the people. And through this work, we created a preliminary map of San Pedro's diversity, sustainability, and cultural presence in Peru. This is not the map. But just to show you more or less what we are talking about, here in the yellow oval is San Pedro's habitat in Peru. There's also some wild San Pedro in southern Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Chile, and Argentina, but it's very little compared to what we find in Peru, and it wasn't included in our survey. Here in the turquoise area is where traditional San Pedro shamanism still exists. And here's Cusco. A lot of people think San Pedro grows in Cusco, but it does not. There's an endemic relative of the plant there called Echinopsis cuscoensis, which the local people call giganton, but it's a non-ceremonial species of cactus. So in our preliminary survey, we found three things. First, that wild San Pedro is incredibly diverse, more diverse than the 3 or 4 official mescaline-containing species of Echinopsis can describe. These are photos of the 27 phenotypes which were in the phytochemical study we did, which we presented at the ESPD 55 conference in UK last spring. But we estimate that there are well over 100 different phenotypes of San Pedro in Peru alone. Some habitats can contain 7 distinct types of San Pedro with distinct medicinal actions which coexist side by side. The cultural ways that people work with the plants are dependent on the properties of the specific type of San Pedro that they use. Second, we confirmed something that has been reported by anthropologists since the 1960s. Many, if not most, Andean communities have lost their connection with San Pedro as a shamanic medicine as a result of 500 years of violent colonialism and religion. In some of the communities we visited in the most astonishing San Pedro habitats on Earth with the highest mescaline plants known to science, they use a decoction of San Pedro today to, and I quote, treat fevers in cows and children. But there is one great unbroken cultural tradition around San Pedro shamanism which still exists in North Peru, in Ancash, La Libertad, Lambayeque, and Piura, where mestizo people work with San Pedro in all-night rituals called mesadas. The third thing that we found is that wild San Pedro is harvested at an unsustainable rate throughout its habitat in Peru. And by unsustainable, I mean it is being harvested at a faster rate than it is able to regenerate, and old growth plants are being harvested at a disproportionate rate. So I'll get into the specifics of what we discovered in our research in a moment. But first, I wanted to turn it over to Josip for a few minutes to share his own experience of the last few decades that have shaped the context for what is happening with San Pedro today in Peru.
When I was 5, with curiosity and innocence, I ate my first raw San Pedro salad with honey in my family garden. I love honey, so I ate a lot. I remember my grandfather, Don Nicolás del Rio, says to my uncle and sisters, "Stop to take San Pedro. This is not a drug." He means that it's a sacred medicine that needs to be taken with respect, with guidance, and with a higher purpose. I never took a pill until he died. When I was sick, he always came with plant medicine from our garden. Officially, he was a marine and politician, but traditionally, he was a curandero naturista. Until the 70s, San Pedro was not used very much outside of North Peru, except as a drug for young people. All the traditional use of the plant was in North Peru. 10 years later, I was living in North Peru, in Chimbote, and I was fascinated by the legacy of the ancient cultures that worked with San Pedro: Chavin, Cupisnique, Moche, Sican. I was understanding how important San Pedro was for them and how alive the use of the plant was today in modern society. There I met Maestro Felipe, He became my elder brother. I learned from him everything about the art of curanderismo and the traditional use of San Pedro ceremonially. I ended up working as the assistant of Felipe for some years, but then I made the decision to follow my own path with San Pedro by myself. At the age of 18, I was overwhelmed by the amount of commitment and responsibility needed to carry the wisdom of the plant for other people. I started to live part-time in Pisac in the early 90s. There was no exotic retreat in Cusco or the Sacred Valley then. No yoga, no ayahuasca. There was coca. Coca is the most important element of the ancestral Andean spirituality. It is the vehicle of social and cultural cohesion in the Andes. Cusco is the center of the world of coca. And without coca, nothing exists. But tourists were just starting to ask about San Pedro in the early 90s. I was saying, do you want to have a real San Pedro experience? Go to North Peru. But people come looking for the superficial charm of the psychedelia. I said, okay, I know somebody who drinks more San Pedro than water, Sampi. So maybe you can experience San Pedro in a way that is free from ritual. And then, by the year 2000, more and more tourists were starting to visit Cusco, and the interest in having a psychedelic experience to connect with Andean spirituality becomes trendy. The only 2 stalls in Cusco market that sold San Pedro for local use suddenly received high demand for cactus. Within 3 or 4 years, they cultivated mature plants that were coming from Arequipa, the land of my grandfather, in South Peru, where Josip. Then the market was filled with leftover baby fruits from Arequipa. The strength of the medicine from these babies was lower. New practitioners were disconnected from the traditional way to use these plants, and the answer was to use more and more cactus for dosage. By 2005, the demand for high mescaline plants opened the door for wild plants from Lima and Ancash to come to the market. Hundreds of wild plants started to be shipped to Cusco market and retreat centers around. I knew these new wild plants. They come from the place where I grew up, where I had some of my first experience as a teenager drinking San Pedro in the mountains. They are all mother plants, which is why they give people such powerful experiences. And so I realized in 2005 that what was happening was going to create a problem with sustainability of the plant. We planted the first San Pedros in Pisac in '99 as protectors, as connectors, like traditionally we do in Peru. But it was not enough medicine yet to guarantee that my friends, my family, always will have San Pedro. At that point in my life, I realized that I always will be connected with the plant. So then I made the decision to create a San Pedro garden in my hometown, in Chaclacayo, on the land of my father and grandfather. Not for any kind of business, but to protect the spirit of the plant for future generations. In 2007, my old friend and master, Sampi Paz, agreed to help me to collect cactus to start the new garden at Casa Muyu with the commitment to love and respect these plants.
So in the 90s, there was already one subspecies of Echinopsis peruviana that was listed as threatened by the Peruvian government. And then Carlos Ostolaza, the top cactus expert in Peru, did a survey in 2006 and recommended that E. peruviana itself be listed as endangered. This was a year or 2 after Josip tells us that these plants started coming to the Cusco market. And nothing really happened with that until 2013, when MINAM in Peru recommended listing both E. peruviana and E. pachanoi. They specifically decided this in consultation with Ostolaza as a result of their study that exposed the extent of the San Pedro powder export market in Lima at that time. And then in 2016, a PhD student from North Peru surveyed the wild populations of Echinopsis pachinoi and confirmed that they are severely overharvested, even in natural refuges specifically protected by the Peruvian government. And there in the north, it's not harvest for retreat centers or for San Pedro powder, it's harvest for traditional cultural use. So there are two different things going on at once, one in the south and one in the north. We'll start with the south. This is Echinopsis peruviana, also known as a dragon. It grows in the ecosystems of the central coast of Peru, centered on Lima. This particular plant in this photo is probably hundreds of years old, and its main stalk is as big around as my torso. If you've drunk San Pedro and Cusco in the last 15 years, you were probably drinking these incredible plants. If you've used desiccated San Pedro powder, you were probably taking these plants. San Pedro has this wonderful ability to regenerate itself when cut. It births new sprouts, which cactus people call pups, from its body when it's harvested. And there are ways to harvest the mature plants, which are more like pruning, where the pups have time to grow up and elongate and make pups of their own, and the whole plant gets stronger and bushier and taller over time. That's how Andean people have propagated and managed San Pedro as part of cattle grazing landscapes in this part of Peru. But unfortunately, fewer and fewer mature plants means that the existing plants are being harvested down to their roots, as you can see in this photo. Even then, the plant has life in it, and it keeps sprouting pups. But then the pups are broken off and taken to market for a few successive years, and the plant runs out of juice and dies. Many of these plants are sent to Cusco for retreat center use. But according to the Peruvian Ministry of the Environment report, which I referenced earlier, even more are processed into San Pedro powder and exported to the international community. In 2013, they decided to limit the exportation of dry San Pedro out of Peru to 40 tons per year, but they acknowledged that there was illegal harvest and exportation happening on top of that. This was 9 years ago, and since then, illegal harvest and export has skyrocketed. Another factor is the human one. We live about 30 minutes away from these plants at our home in Lima. And according to indigenous harvesters there, the going rate for a kilo of dried San Pedro is 10 soles, which is under $3 US. According to that government report, 1 kilo of dry San Pedro powder takes 46.5 kilos of fresh cactus to make. Add to that the work of processing, pulling off the spines and the skin, slicing the outer green layer from the inner white pith, and sun-drying. These companies who bought dry cactus for $3 per kilo sell their finished product for $60 to $120 a kilo in Peru, mostly to the tourist market and even more internationally. This is exploitation. These were some absolutely astonishing plants that we met earlier this year. They're over 50 feet long, dangling off a cliff into open air. The indigenous Andean communities of the Central Coast that are harvesting and selling these plants have lost their ancestral connection to San Pedro because of colonialism. And now those very colonial forces are coming back and exploiting both the people and the plants because they've discovered a new way to make money. Cutting ancient plants to the root to make San Pedro powder is like harvesting old-growth redwoods to make toilet paper. In North Peru, something else is going on. The healers there work with Echinopsis pachinoi, which is a slimmer and often spineless species of San Pedro. The plant is deeply embedded in the culture of shamanism in the north, and it has been for the last 4,000 years, uninterrupted. There has always been enough San Pedro in the wild to provide for the needs of northern curanderismo. When Wade Davis was there in 1981, the wild stands were still well stocked. But that was pre-terrorism, and for the next decade, the guerrilla presence in rural Peru sent refugees to the cities. Since then, urban populations have exploded in North Peru, many people are using San Pedro, and every year the plants that come to market are smaller and more expensive. Northern Peruvian San Pedro is considerably more expensive than Lima area plants, which is likely why it's not used for San Pedro powder by international companies. This overharvesting is purely from local use by curanderos, who are mainly in cities, using San Pedro that comes from the wild. These northern plants, particularly the well-known varieties, have been overharvested to near extinction in many places in the wild. Our research in North Peru confirms what Joel Gilcon published in 2016. Even 40 years ago, the north was a forest of San Pedro. That is not the case today. Our preliminary GIS work, triangulating hydrographic factors with elevation factors, with temperature factors, suggests that less than 1,000 kilometers squared of well-stocked habitat, that is, habitat that can still be reasonably harvested from, where San Pedro is thriving, remain in all Peru. And in case you were wondering, this is what 1,000 square kilometers looks like superimposed over southwest BC. It's about here at UBC over to Coquitlam and down to the US border. So yes, there will be enough San Pedro for a while, until there's not. So apart from the overharvesting that we described, there are a few other factors which are impacting the plant. Agriculture, grazing, mining, and other industrial development is affecting the plant's habitats in all of Peru. There are a lot of new roads going in, a lot of new cattle pastures being cleared pretty indiscriminately for the plants. Climate change is also affecting cacti all over the world, but it's really affecting San Pedro there in the central Andes. It has very specific water requirements and can easily get too much water or too little water, and that is already happening. Also, religious extremism is eroding both culture and wild plant populations, particularly evangelical Christianity, that's taking hold in the last 5 years. And so I just want to reiterate also what is happening culturally. Many, if not most, indigenous communities in and around San Pedro habitat in Peru no longer have strong cultural traditions around the plant. San Pedro is mostly utilized by mestizo practitioners with a strong syncretic connection to both indigenous ancestral traditions and the Catholic faith. Strong cultural traditions remain in North Peru, but those who practice them are mostly over 60 years old. These traditions have been completely lost elsewhere. And evangelical Christianity is embedded in many communities and actively works against the presence of San Pedro and shamanism. A few young people are learning now because curanderismo is not lucrative and it's not socially accepted generally. So the Cusco boom of San Pedro tourism has affected the plants terribly. But this is not just about the plants. Imagine that all of this boom is going on in Cusco, while in North Peru, traditional San Pedro shamanism is being lost to modernity and condemned by religion. While in North Peru, the San Pedro masters' children, their sons and daughters, for the first time in 4,000 years, are no longer learning to work with the plant. Well, for the first time in the history of San Pedro, people who are not from the Andes are benefiting from the plant, while indigenous communities are living in extreme poverty. So what can be done? Well, cultivating San Pedro is not difficult in the right climate. There's San Pedro planted in gardens and by people's front doors all over North Peru, and it's a really promising option there. But it's not yet happening on anywhere near the scale that it would need to supply the harvest demand there. Cusco, to be fair, is a difficult climate to cultivate the quantity of cactus that the retreat centers use there, and we can be generous and assume that that's why they don't do it. Josip started planting San Pedro 20 years ago, and his garden is a good example of what's possible with time and with love. There are over 4,000 heads of San Pedro in his Lima garden, made up of over 40 varieties. So I'll hand it over to him and let him tell you about his experience growing the plant.
We can see here the first 132 heads and bodies from Arequipa that we planted in 2007. Like this. But after 15 years, they are 3 or 4 meters tall, and the amount of San Pedro has multiplied to about 40 times its original size. They produce beautiful flowers and also fruits. It has never been necessary to cut a plant to cook. When they get big enough, they fall down by themselves, and we can use the arms that fall for medicine and to plant the heads. And time and patience are the only things we need. Today, the garden receives plants from all over Peru in an effort to preserve and diversify, and as a way to create new interrelationship between different types of plants. This is the nursery area where the smaller heads get planted to make roots. It's a really lovely and friendly community of cactus. We learned over the years how to create an environment that is mostly self-sustaining. The importance of growing your own plants comes with the teachings that no human maestro can give you. Only the San Pedro spirit, who is the great master, can teach you. After more than 20 years drinking San Pedro with different maestros, I started to serve medicine to other people. It was only at that time that I felt ready to make the commitment to the plant, and I understood how to not kill her spirit when I cook her. Cooking is a traditional way to prepare San Pedro medicine. When we cook medicine with care, we use the 4 elements: water in the pot, fire under the pot, wind in the word of our prayers and in the steam that evaporates, and earth, which is the body of the plant. And the 4 elements become one with the 5th element, love, and that is how we can keep the spirit of the plant alive. When people use San Pedro powder, they lose this alchemy of connection of cooking San Pedro. So San Pedro powder kills the spirit of the plant. Thanks to the use of San Pedro powder, thousands of people around the world have been able to meet the plant and receive healing. But the destruction of the wild cactus cannot be justified by any awakening of consciousness. The big spirit of San Pedro is made up of all the plants in their endemic habitats over time. The big spirit of San Pedro lives in the wild, in the places that plants grow that humans never touch. If wild San Pedro is extinguished, the great spirit of San Pedro will be extinguished. The powder does not have the whole organic material of the cactus. So its use does not represent the maximum power of the plant. It is not full spectrum that the way of traditional cooking is. The loss of connection with ancestral roots of the San Pedro tradition is the dissolution of the soul of San Pedro. San Pedro spirit learning how to help humanity in contemporary times and in a new context, and is open to new uses and practices. But if it's not for nothing that 4,000 years of ancestral use of the plant in the Peruvian Andes already teach us what San Pedro likes and what San Pedro doesn't like. For hundreds of years, Andean healers have used the head of the plant as the central piece of the mesa to direct the ceremony. Later, the head is usually an offering to Pachamama, but today I leave the head to the plant instead. The medicine we cook has the spirit of the plant alive inside it. So a small amount of the medicine is put on the mesa. The head of the plant is alive and growing in a safe and beautiful place. And so the medicine can stay alive and growing in the body of the people who drink it. When people treat the plant like only a way to make money, without respect, without prayers, without music, without dancing, without a strong connection, the plant doesn't like to show their full power. It doesn't matter how much you take, the plant will not show his first to you. When I harvest medicine, I can see the eyes of San Pedro. I can take his body, ask him if, hey, you want to be cooked? You want to share? Is there anybody in the world who can see the eyes of San Pedro and take the body of San Pedro to talk with him when he's already dry powder inside a plastic bag? The spirit of the plant dissolves like powder in water. When we plant a cactus, we are growing medicine, a medicine of relationship and reciprocity, a medicine of freedom and love. Every San Pedro cactus is unique and has something to teach us. When after years of care and trust, a plant decides to bloom flowers, the gift we receive are pure medicine. And she's ready to become medicine. We can witness how a spine can become a flower, carrying a powerful message of transmutation. After all this process of connection with the plant, we can be ready to serve medicine. And this is why I say, grow medicine, serve medicine. Yeah. Grow medicine, and then serve medicine.
In August 2020, Josip and I founded Huachuma Collective, or Colectivo Huachuma, in Peru in partnership with Felipe Pereira. We're a Peru-based nonprofit association. We empower communities to plant San Pedro, creating reciprocal models of growing, working with, and distributing medicine, which regenerate local ecosystems and Andean traditions. So our goals are both people-oriented and plants-oriented, because we've witnessed firsthand how the presence and revaluation of the plant revitalizes culture, and how the strength of culture protects the plants. And I just want to recognize Felipe specifically here. He is the cultural advisor and Wilca Umo shaman of the Chimbote and Coixco indigenous community on the north coast of Peru. He's been involved in activism and indigenous rights for 40 years, and he is leading our work in North Peru as Colectivo Huachuma's community director. And then Josip is our director of operations and manages all our planting projects.
I can tell you something about the work we did this year. There was no ceremony during the pandemic lockdowns in Peru. So the plants that were in the market at the beginning of the pandemic start to rot after more than 1 year cut in the dark. They are salas plants, which are the most famous variety of San Pedro in North Peru, but they are extremely endangered on the wild. So with the help of our friends, we rescued 433 heads of these plants from the markets of Chiclayo, Trujillo, Chimbote. Here was with Don Juanito in Chiclayo. A lot of these plants went to the indigenous community of El Castillo in Santa, close to the pueblo of Don Felipe. And some plants went to Don Gavino, who has a garden in Casma. It's a miracle of garden in the middle of the sand. Maestro Felipe did a blessing for the plants with we plant in Chanquillo, as we do when we go to promote the conservation and diffusion of the use of the plants in communities. Don Pascual in Barbacoa had a good technique to plant the San Pedro on the borders of his land, close to agriculture and irrigation canals, which help to water the plants in the desert. Mayucayan has an organization called Green Tortugas Peru, and he has already planted over 100 San Pedros in his community out of the love of his heart. We donated another 46 plants to his organization. And if you remember this photo from before, this is Mayo and me drinking San Pedro together in Ancash in 1990. So not much has changed. We create a new bed in the garden in Chaclacayo to receive the rest of the plants, and they are growing so well. It's like 97% alive and growing, rooting yet. That just 3 weeks ago, I was in Peru checking.
So as Josip describes, our pilot projects have focused on planting San Pedro in communities in North Peru and making relationships throughout San Pedro's habitat to continue and expand this work. This is the model of Huachuma Collective that has emerged out of those conversations with community members. Local communities are the beating heart of what we do. They make the decisions, they come up with the ideas, and they care for the plants. And we work to connect a worldwide collective of people who love the plants towards supporting those communities with the resources they need to dedicate more time and more energy to San Pedro. We have 4 main areas of work which mirror the 4 winds and the 4 roads of Andean stories. Conservation is the core of what we do. We want to work with local authorities to enforce poaching laws that care for remaining old-growth plants and revalue the plants in the eyes of community decision makers. Planting supports that by ensuring that these elder plants have children. We recognize both gifting plants and planting them as sacred acts, which are done always with a series of blessings. More research is a necessary part of this. I just barely scratched the surface with my PhD research, and a lot of this research can actually be designed and performed by people in Andean communities or by Peruvian students. And then education is centered on creating space and time for young Andean and coastal people to study traditional shamanism with their elders and to be involved in caring for the plants. And of course, all of these areas intersect in really interesting ways. So our pilot projects over the last 2 years have helped us enormously to refine our work and to move forward with confidence at a larger scale. It looks simple when you put it in a nice model like that, but the reality of the work on the ground in Peru is obviously much more complicated. It generally moves at the speed of relationship. So with those limitations in mind, our goal is to get as much San Pedro rooted in the ground under the care of community members and growing as we can, as quickly as we can. In 2023, we plan to support Andean and coastal communities to plant 10,000 San Pedros on their lands. We will support Felipe to host workshops with the communities in our networks and continue building relationships with community members who want to collaborate. We are already in the process of creating a seed collection initiative, which allows communities to sell fruits to us now and receive seedlings of their endemic varieties to plant in 3 years. And in the long run, we want to help communities create their own facilities for seed starting. We, this year, will build a seed starting nursery at Huachuma Collective headquarters in Chaclacayo. We want as many of our plants as possible to be seed started from wild, naturally pollinated seeds in order to preserve as much genetic diversity as possible. And we're also creating a donation program for retreat centers to fund San Pedro planting in Andean communities in reciprocity for the medicine that they serve. So we're giving retreat centers and people who serve medicine a better way to be in reciprocity with the plants they're using, because that is currently very difficult to do unless you are planting large numbers of San Pedro yourself, which hardly anyone is doing. And we also offer consulting services to retreat centers and individuals who want to start cultivating San Pedro in Peru. So in the next 10 years, with the right support, we project that we can help Andean communities plant 1 million San Pedros in culturally resonant ways, which lift up their pueblos economically and spiritually. These are the kinds of numbers that we need to be talking about if San Pedro is going to become a fully sustainable medicine, and if its gifts are going to be felt by the whole world. It's the only thing that's going to make it possible, because the world is just beginning to discover San Pedro. The worst has not come yet, but the time is now. This is what a healthy, thriving ecosystem of San Pedro looks like. It's an integral part of the agricultural landscape. It's managed with Andean planting methods, which help it grow and expand. This is a photo from the largest remaining reserve of San Pedro on Earth, which happens to be in an area of land protected by the Peruvian government. So with more community involvement coupled with governmental support, this is the way a lot of San Pedro habitats could look.
Huachuma Collective means to express the needs of the plant, to preserve its legacy in the Andes. Huachuma Collective means to create the conditions to make San Pedro culture stronger as a way to stop the extinction of the plant. Huachuma Collective means to create sustainable and reciprocal ways to use the plant. I do believe that if more people work with San Pedro in a sustainable way, we will create a more sustainable world. Whoever gets to know the spirit of the plant receive a gift of love and connection to nature that makes them a better person.
So if this is touching something in your heart and you want to help San Pedro and Andean communities, you can start this week. Grow cacti. Grow them on your sunniest windowsills. Grow them outside in climates that don't freeze. This is one of the very best things you can do to help the plant. Just grow them and love them. And it is legal, I think. Also, choose Peruvian practitioners for your Huachuma medicine experiences. I would say choose people who work with sustainable medicine, but there aren't very many out there. And don't buy dried powdered San Pedro, just don't. Find other ways to connect with the plants, the living plants. If you'd like, you can subscribe to our newsletter. You can follow us on social media. We share a lot of our work, photos from the field, and love sharing it there. So I'll put the links to those on the last slide of the presentation. And then if you feel called to support what we're doing in Peru, donate to Huachuma Collective. Believe me when I say that we're just getting started. I really want to thank the Usona Institute, who funded all of the PhD research, which uncovered the extent of the sustainability issues with San Pedro. I want to thank my PhD committee members, Wade Davis, Zachary Walsh over in the Okanagan, and Dennis McKenna, for wholeheartedly supporting this direction of my research. I want to thank our collaborator and our co-founder and our friend, Don Felipe Pereira Llanos. Do I have time to read the names of our donors, Stephen? 5 minutes? Okay, thank you. The people who are giving gifts of love and life to the plant and who have funded all of our planting work in the last 2 years are Paul, Pat, Devin, Brian, Mary, Mayana, Robin, Ian, Peta, Vito, Chio, Sadie, Delancey, Barda, Sebastian, Mateo, Ricardo, Farid, Henning, Rosemary, Jenny, Chris, Elizabeth, Lena, Jeremy, Marcus, Gethin, Tamara, Faisal, and Ananda. Thank you. And then huachumacollective.org has our contact information as a sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at huachuma.collective. And we do have a booth over on that wall. Please come visit us this weekend and we can talk. We also have free stickers. We have more information. And we've got lots of really incredible San Pedro-themed Peruvian digital art prints and some Peruvian silver work by this guy for sale, with 100% of the profits going to planting San Pedro in Andean communities. So thank you so much.
You wrote a chapter in the book where you talked about some of the unique properties and benefits of San Pedro, and you've done a fantastic job of, the supportive work that you're doing here. But you didn't really say much about, you know, the uniqueness of that plant as it works with people, where you've said that elsewhere. Can you take a couple of minutes briefly to say something about that?
Sure, and I might not be the best person to answer this, but I hope that you've all been able to feel San Pedro in contact with these photos, and feel in your heart the energy of San Pedro and what San Pedro brings as a frequency, as a world. San Pedro is a plant that's incredibly connected with the heartbeat of nature, which moves us into a world that is imminently here. It's imminently in our bodies. It's imminently connected to this life here, now, in the present. And it's really an incredible bridge medicine, because you're not going you know, so far out before you're ready to go out. San Pedro is going to build the walkway the entire way, and it's a really very warm, very beautiful medicine, very connected. As I said, it's got a 10 million year history right there in the central Andes, and so very connected with climatic patterns. And I really believe that, you know, as a plant which holds, as Josip often says, the memory of time as light in its body, it's a plant that can teach us a lot about the climate and climate cycles, and that is a really interesting avenue of exploration, I think.
Could we give them another warm hand, please?